Welcome back. It's time for our conversation with an expert in international trade and international trade law. Mark Warner is international trade lawyer at MAAW Law. He joins us now from New York. Mark, good to talk to you. I'll begin with a question I asked our previous guest. What has happened to the narrative that the threats of 25% tariffs from the White House were a bargaining position that could be negotiated down? Do you still believe that? Did you ever believe that was what lay ahead, and do you believe it now?
I believed it to some extent. I think that the reality is Canada is a bit of an example that Trump wants to use for the rest of the world, and he's trying to use the national security pretext as a basis for these new tariffs, because basically Congress has the authority to set tariffs in the United States, and the president gets authority as it edges closer to national security. So he can never entirely abandon the pretext of national security. So I never thought that would go away. I did think, however, it could be more moderated if what he was hearing on the other side could induce him to that. And I think we've been a bit schizophrenic in the Canadian response, on the record and off the record. And as a consequence, I think if the government was thinking they could get them to basically say, Canada, you have a clean bill of health, that wasn't the path to negotiated settlement, in my view. And we haven't left him very many face-saving outs, and we haven't seemed to recognize that he's really not. He's negotiating through Canada with the rest of the world.
What would a face-saving out look like in this situation? The federal government has stepped up its investments in border security. The government has tried to make the point that the amount of fentanyl being shipped from Canada to the United States is de minimis, and the government has made various candidates for leadership, Liberal and Conservative, have pledged to spend more on the Canadian military.
Yeah, and then you have one candidate threatening nuclear war. You've got other ones doing other things. Look, Americans hear what we say in Canada, so that's part of it. Also, I think that I think we have to be clear on some of this stuff relating to fentanyl. That in the drafting of the original executive order, I think you'll find that Trump also linked what he was saying to the changes to the $800 de minimis rule, which there was some further talk about the other day, and that basically is. The under $800 shipments under $800 escape the American duties, but they also escape customs inspection. And the argument would be that an awful lot of shipments come from Canada under that $800 de minimis rule, and more so than come from Mexico, if you look at it. And so part of their argument, at least this is their argument in the executive order, is we don't really know what's crossing the border completely, because it could be small shipments of fentanyl. We don't have to like their arguments. I'm just saying for the drafting of it from American national security pretext for a legal basis going forward, that's kind of their argument. And I'm not sure every time we hammer in about how small the number is, unless Canada has a way of saying that we know what's in those $800 shipments, I don't know how you can really say that.
Okay. What do you think of the Canadian response today, which, as expected, is the immediate declaration of corresponding tariffs on U.S. goods?
I think it was as expected. I think what I call the political market demands that Canada retaliate. I think the reality, and we did it in a more measured way, as before at the beginning of the February when the first go round. I think the rhetoric around the retaliation is much harsher than the reality. The initial go is what is it, $30 billion? That's much less than one would have expected if we were doing the so-called quote dollar for dollar stuff. So I think that's about right. That gives some scope for further negotiation of something if we want to do that. But somehow we've got to get the political markets in Canada to align with the economic markets. And I think we've seen from Trump saying that he will match the retaliation, which is what I would expect him to do. So somehow you've got to find an off-ramp. But we'll see if the government wants to take it. They've left themselves a little way. But then again, the rhetoric around the announcement itself, again, is that kind of harsh rhetoric that we know that Trump is going to say, no, I get the last word. Now, we want to have the last word. That's another thing. We're 1/10 the size of the United States. That will be a ratcheting up of a trade dispute.
Do you believe Donald Trump can be moved off his positions by deteriorating economic conditions in the United States, a spike up in inflation, which many people predict, a rise in gasoline prices in certain markets that use Canadian crude oil, an economic slowdown, complaints by large business groups that these U.S. tariffs are hurting their business?
I'm not sure. I think that that's the theory behind it. I'm not sure that we'll see that. I think the effects, I guess, are going to be, in the short term, a little bit more diffuse than that. I also think that Trump is a guy who's never going to run for election again. A lot of the, quote, Team Canada strategy is based on this idea that you can get a lot of people to complain to their Congress people, their senators, and their state leaders and their local people, and they'll put pressure on the president, who may care what happens to his party in a future election or his own electoral prospects. I don't think that's Trump. So I think the theory is wrong for this guy. I think that the theory what we're doing is probably likely just to embolden him. But I think it's possible that if the market were to fall much more precipitously than it has, that might be something that he would look at. But I don't think, does Trump really care about the rabble in the street? I've never really got that impression too much.